Well, hi, everybody. My name is Catherine Stoner. I'm the Mosbacher Director of the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law here at the Freeman Spogli Institute. I'm also a senior fellow, a colleague of Marcel's. Marcel is his main appointment is in the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law. We have been thrilled to have him with us since 2013. Yes, yeah. But most of you know Marcel even better than I do. I know we have many of his former students here, his current colleagues, his past colleagues, and we're so bitterly, sweetly gathered today. Let me put it that way. New adjective, Marcel, for you, because we will miss having Marcel's presence at our seminars, his insights on graduate student papers, postdoctoral papers. He's just been incredibly generous with his mentorship of our pre- and postdoctoral scholars here at CDDRL. And I don't want to speak for Kate, but I will by saying that I'm guessing, yes, that the King Center feels much the same way. I should thank, first of all, Marcel for joining us today, for giving us this scholarship. I'm so looking forward to hearing from all of you and reviewing, his, well, should I say, I hate to quote or make a reference to Taylor Swift, but here goes. Marcel Fafchamps eras from his work in the World Bank, his work more as an agricultural economist, then his work on women in Africa. So we're looking forward to sort of the full expanse of his work. I want to thank Kate and Jessica and the King Center and their staff for doing this with us here at CDDRL. We have started to do more and more things together, and it's always a pleasure for us. Melanie, thank you as well for the hard work that you've put into this. And special thanks to the CDDRL staff, Stacy and Nora, who will be very, very subtly going around and taking your pictures as well, and Kristen, who's buzzing around. My friends here know I love a microphone, but I'm going to pass it to you, my friend. I think one of the most special things will be to hear from Marcel himself. So I'm glad that we're starting the day off with that. Later, we will also hear from, I think it's students and colleagues through video tributes, and then enjoy these rapid fire sessions, which I'll confess, I'm a political scientist. We don't have rapid fire sessions, do we, Brad? Like we sometimes have them, but these are more economist conventions, I suppose. And Melanie, we will be observing economist conventions, yes. So you can interrupt people, except not me and not Marcel. So Marcel, why don't I just vacate? Here's Marcel Fafchamps. And this is the microphone for here, but you're mic'd up.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm mic'd up? All right. Okay, so before, I want to present something, a current research project I'm working on, but before I do that, I'd like to say a few words. Those who know me know that I'm not intent on accolades, but I'm really deeply grateful for Catherine, Kate, and Melanie, and of course, many others for their work on organizing this conference. It's really nice to be appreciated by colleagues. Thank you very much. And before launching the presentation, I would also like to thank my wife, Abby, and our respective families for their constant support over the years. Without Abby, I would not be here today. She is and has always been the rock on which I've built my career. She had to restore my morale after each of the hundreds of article rejections and to accompany me across the globe when a change of scenery would benefit me professionally. For all this, I'm eternally grateful to her. Thanks, Abby. I would also like to thank all my collaborators for having made research a lot more enjoyable over the years, and all my students for having filled my professional life with endless curiosity, youthful enthusiasm, and passion for research. They kept me young. Thank you. A few chosen nuggets of my life and career I would like to share with you as they throw some light on my direction of travel through the years. A long time ago, when I announced to my dad that I was enrolling in economics as an undergrad, he said, "Economist? You can do better than that. Engineering would be perfect for you." My response was, "Okay, I don't want to build bridges for the rest of my life. I want to deal with people. And what if I enroll also in law?" So after that, he was happy with that. So I basically completed a 5-year degree in law and a 4-year degree in economics in 6 years. So that also, it also means that, it turns out I enjoyed law. And this influenced my choice of research topics later on, as you will see today. But I'm an economist. I chose to study development because I'm curious about people, and I like to work across countries and cultures. Apart from 33,500 citations to my work, the achievement I'm most proud of is the diversity of my co-authors. Out of the 143 peer-reviewed articles listed on my CV, 117 are with co-authors, and of those, 48 are only with male co-authors, fine. 42 are only with female co-authors, and 27 are with both male and female co-authors. I don't think many people can say that, and this could not have happened by chance. Furthermore, I've worked with co-authors from 29 different countries across 5 continents, from 10 European countries, 8 Asian countries, 7 African countries, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and newly Colombia. I'm still looking for a willing penguin for Antarctica.
You have more time for that one.
Yeah, I start looking. Some key moments have influenced my trajectory. In 1982, in Ethiopia, I wrote my first paper on household models. It was a literature survey. And I showed it to Willem, a Dutch friend of mine, who said, "It's not very good." Shocked, he complained, "How can you say this? I thought you were my friend." Which he replied, "Well, if you cannot get honest comments from your friends, from who are you going to get them?" I saw the vision of this, and we remain friends. That's been part of my mantra. Now, a couple of decades later, I was at my first and last gathering of 40 to 50 top-ranking academics from around the UK, organized by ESRC, the main UK source of research fundings for the social sciences. And for an hour or so, ESRC discussed, there were these bureaucrats on the table there, discussed how difficult it was for them to get properly filled report forms from research teams around the country. And wouldn't it be a good idea for ESRC to organize training sessions to teach us to fill them? I was frustrated by the absurdity of the proposal. I heard myself saying, well, some of the best minds of the country are gathered at this table. If they cannot understand the ESRC reporting requirements, perhaps the problem is not with them, but with the requirements themselves. There was a gasp, a silence. Break was called to the meeting, during which Richard Blundell congratulated me for my bravery. Then I concluded that not everyone is happy to hear honest comments. Read the room, Marcel, read the room. This event was not an isolated incident because I already had formed 12. My last primary school year, our teacher and school director gave us as assignment to write an essay about him. And I wrote that he would be happier taking retirement. Nearly 60 years later, I'm taking my own advice. And now I'd like to talk to you about a recent project I have, which I hope will develop into a book, if not a long article. It's about behavioral markets. And if you remember, in the early 2000s, I published a book on market institutions in Africa, based on a decade or so of research until then. Since that book, which was based mostly on game theory ideas, I've learned a lot about behavioral economics. I got really fascinated by it. I really enjoy it. And so I decided the time is come to marry standard economic theory, standard economic approaches with behavioral economics in the study of markets. That's why I call it behavioral markets. Now, markets are central to economics. The efficiency of markets depends on the existence of market institutions. Now, what are market institutions? So if you read post-economic writing on that, they have a very simplified view of what market institutions constitute. They say, well, we need a modern legal code, which, by the way, most colonies got from us. And courts need to be there to enforce contracts according to these laws. So that's the view of a lot of economists. And in fact, even at the World Bank, I remember there were people arguing that way. Now, I have a law degree. I know that market institutions are a lot more than that. I'm familiar with patrimonial, contract law, commercial law, transport law, and I know that it's more complicated. So first of all, courts never enforce contracts, like nearly never, maybe, because they can only offer reparation. Contract has already been breached. Too late. It's only a threat of court action that can enforce contracts, right? But for most transactions, this threat is not credible. Why? The loss from the transaction is too small to justify initiated court action. The defendant has nothing to foreclose upon. It's basically judgment proof. The plaintiff is unable to produce sufficient evidence of contract or breach. No account, no invoicing. A lot of firms in the informal sector are like that. Or even if there was, the plaintiffs did not suffer actual damage, but they were just put at risk of damage. So for all these reasons, basically what you find is that it's very rare for people to go to court for a breach of contract. If you look at court action, it's mostly things like maybe a sale of a house, occasionally a labor contract, permanent labor contract, or basically marriage. That's probably the big one. But that's not the kind of transaction economists have in mind. So that means that we need something else. So what does enforce contract? So my argument is that what actually does the trick is market support institutions that shape the environment in which transactions take place. Some of these are government bureaucracies, say the Mint printing money. Some of these are private bureaucracies, Dun & Bradstreet, for instance, Moody's, like that. Some of these are professional practices, deontology, about doctors, about journalists, about lawyers. Some of these are prescriptive social norms, like don't lie, but you can omit things. I think that's prescriptive norm in lots of places. And some of the descriptive social norms, like arriving on time or delivering on time. And so from that, this is just categorization, but in fact, if you start looking at market support institutions, as a lawyer, there's lots of them. So first set, I've divided them in like 10 sets or something like that. Institutions that guarantee accuracy. The first one is about weights and grades, but weights are critical. If you have been to African markets or Asian markets, they don't use standardized weights or measurements. They're a little thin, it changes from market to another, sometimes from one trader to another. It makes people, makes it very hard for people to figure out what they're buying. Rules regarding information on packaging, audit and certified accounts, free press with protection against libel and defamation. They can circulate information about, wrong information, and also protection for whistleblowers, which is weak in many countries, and protection of journalistic sources. So these are things about accuracy and protection of accuracy. Reputation. Well, this reputation requires identification. If you don't have an ID system or a business registry, you cannot have identification. So that means registries are important. They also include charities, by the way. They collect money from the public. Who are you giving the money to? They're going to be registries for corporations and charities and other limited liability entities. Public access to judgment, so you know somebody has been information circulation through credit reference or credit rating, brand and trademark protection, so that your reputation is attached to a name that is protected, that cannot be stolen from you, and copyright protection, things like that. So there's lots of, can go on, certification of bank accounts. Think of SWIFT and IBAN. Without that, you couldn't have international payments. These are private order institutions. Professions have profession associations that certify doctors, certify lawyers, protect against all kinds of abuse. Pharmacies, taxi drivers, and so on. Plumbers even. Reporting obligations. Public inspections. I'm going to go a bit faster now. Private monitoring of labeling. Think of organic label. That's a private order. In most places, it's a private order setup. So you have typically an NGO that, especially in developing countries, would go around and certify. And they need to be able to follow the whole value chain. So it's a very complicated setup. Ports and harbor, think of ports and harbor being run by multinationals. I remember there was this French guy who had bought about 8 African ports. He was running 8 African ports. I think he sold some of them since, airports and so on. Private security in shopping malls. So private monitoring is going to be there. Matching services, Amazon, Employment Office, in their advertising on Facebook and Google. Regulated exchange. So people think, oh, the free market, that's a stock market. It's a super organized setup with lots and lots of checks and balances and lots of you have to put up and a gigantic bond to be allowed to broker. You and I cannot go to the stock market and place an order. You can only place an order through a broker. It's a very organized market. Commodities exchange, auctions, procurement, tendering, these are all very organized markets. Okay, nudges are there, fine. Warnings are there, fine. Bans. How do we think about bans on certain products and services? Gambling, recreational drugs. And of course, criminal law is there in the background, protect against the most egregious abuses, fraudulent bankruptcy, insider trading, embezzlement, impersonation, false advertising, banned products, prohibited transactions. There's a lot of stuff, pollution, extortion. These are the market support institutions. Some are private, some are public. It's an ecosystem. All right, so that's what I would want to talk about. How do we think about all these institutions? Of course, economics, standard economics has contributed a lot to that analysis. But my problem at this point, having worked on this for a long time, is that economic theory makes assumptions about the way individuals interact with markets. And from these assumptions, they draw very strong policy prescription based on these assumptions. For instance, imperfect information is one of them. But now that I'm more familiar with behavioral economics, I realize that these assumptions may not accurately represent the way people behave. So it can give you an example. So assumption is people are self-interested, act rationally, and form rational belief. That's the form. I'm going to unpack this in a moment, but that's the basic assumption that all economic models do. That's how you get the welfare theorems. When the buyer, so let's imagine a situation where the buyer of a good or a service is not able to check their value. They never know exactly what they got. Think about, you went to see a doctor and then he told you, oh, you have X. Well, you can never actually check that was true. So if this is the case, somebody is offering something that snake oil, this will cure everything. Well, you should, if you are self-interested, rational, and form rational beliefs, you should realize that basically somebody who can actually sell something where I can never check their value, they can cheat me very easily. So the risk of being cheated is very high. So that market should not exist. This is only a market for medical treatment. Okay, so these assumptions, if you want a market for medical treatment, you're going to need, in a world like this, you're going to need a lot of market support institutions. So it means that if we see trade in this case, people did buy snake oil. Some people did buy this bleach against COVID-19 or their malaga oil that is, president was peddling. So when we see such trade, it obviously in an environment where there is no certification, nothing like that. But it violates the assumption. So that's where I want to go. Okay. So I'll summarize some of the behavioral assumptions that are behind economic theory. I will talk about the evidence for and against them, then present an alternative conceptualization. I'm gonna, since I'm trying to present an outline of the book, I'm gonna try to motivate what I'm trying to do. Then I'm gonna give you examples, and some of the slides I'm gonna go through very quickly to show that there is something there. No, I won't have time to elaborate. But the starting point is important. That was already in my earlier book. I see all market transactions as contracts. This is very much a civil law approach to things. It goes back to Roman law, actually. And so basically, when I talk about market transactions or voluntary exchange or contracts, I basically mean the same thing: a mutual consent to trade. Okay, so that's my assumption. And once you see transactions that way, you realize that pretty much any transaction raises the possibility of breach. May not be paid or paid with fraudulent money. The quality might not be what you thought it'd be. The timing of payment or delivery might not be what you expected. Warranty, the good turns out to be defective, and you get compensation. So basically, because of these things, it means that the efficiency of markets or market exchange will depend on minimizing breach and what I call regrettable exchange. So basically, you enter voluntarily into an exchange, then you realize, oh, I was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. And so you regret exposed, having agreed the transaction. That's what I want to focus on. So let me talk a little bit about these, unpack these standard assumptions made in economics. Is this clock working? All right. So the first, I start there in not some kind of organized order, but let me start with this one. People respond to material incentives. Okay? Now, that means breach deterrence through material incentive is what enforces contracts. So that's the implication of this. People respond to material incentive. Economists assume that everybody responds to market incentives. But that also means the corollary that people are not motivated by self-image or social image considerations or identity considerations or anything like that. So I just published in the Games and Economic Behavior a paper that we did from an online vignette experiment, an online interactive experiment where people were playing a framed a game of being employer and worker, and in that game, the employer could offer high wage or low wage or a wage conditional on effort. This was with Elwin actually, and then the workers could choose a high or low effort. So what we find is that in the paper, I forgot the exact proportions, but there's a big chunk of people who are intrinsically motivated. They pick the high effort no matter what. They say, well, I've been hired to do a job. They pay me a low wage, fine. And this is, by the way, with people from the US, India, and 5 African countries. It's run online through people recruited through MTurk or Facebook. We did both. Very similar results. And so a lot of people are basically doing the right thing no matter what. A lot of people are providing low effort no matter what, right? Even if you give them, so they're basically working against their own self-interest. They don't pick a, when they are incentivized to provide high effort, they get a bonus, a higher wage when they provide. It's just, they just click a button. So this is, and then the rest of the people, minority is self-interested rational. They respond to incentives. Another batch of actually slightly larger group is conditional cooperators. So basically, if you pay them an unconditional high wage, they provide effort. But yes, there are some people who respond to material incentive. In our data, it's less than 25%, depending on the country. The highest is the US, where people are a lot more responsive to incentives, and the other parts of the world, much lower. What about people? Another assumption is behind there. People are strategic. What does it mean to be strategic? Game theory is all based on the assumption. Without that assumption, you don't have any game theory. But being strategic means perspective taking, strategic perspective taking. You put yourself in the shoes of the other person, and you say, what kind of incentives do they face? Oh, they're going to be, their head is going to be chopped if they cheat me. Maybe I can trust them. Because I believe they respond to incentives. I believe they respond to incentives, and I do perspective taking. I say, okay, fine. They understand that they're in their interest to do that, and so I can predict their action by doing perspective taking. But that assumes that people do perspective taking. There's actually very little evidence of that. I did another experiment with Paulo Falco about that, and based on this interesting literature on level K thinking. And level K thinking, many people basically they react as if the others were all idiots. They were all playing at random. So they don't do strategic perspective taking, which is different from altruistic perspective taking, where oh, this little child, oh my gosh, he's suffering, let's give money to the charity. That's a different form of, this is strategic perspective. There's not enough work on that. All right, so there's corollaries. I'm just going faster. The other one is that assumption 3 is that people are consequentialists. So they think in terms of outcomes, right? They don't, which is kind of strange because economists also, I think most of them also care for democracy, but democracy is not about outcomes, it's about the process by which certain outcomes are achieved, and lots of us are worried at this point. So people do care about process, and there is some behavior. I'm not going to go through that, but there's evidence, behavioral evidence that people care about process. How you achieve a certain outcome does matter to them. And if the outcome is judged, that the process by which the outcome is achieved is not fair or is not legitimate, then people will punish, things like that. People are rational. What does it mean they are rational? Well, they don't react to emotions or impulses. They don't get angry, they don't get jealous, so they pursue their self-interest. And also to react when they react to a transgression. They don't get angry. It rules out anger there. The one on beliefs, I don't think I have to do a lot of convincing, because we know from, everybody knows from behavioral economics that humans are very bad at forming rational beliefs. And this is due to various problems. Because if you have rational beliefs, first, it means that you have to assess risk correctly. You cannot, this is important because when it's combined with other assumptions, like you react to incentives, will assure that you take an optimal level of care, for instance, to avoid breach, for instance. And this will ensure that you do not impose risk on others because of irrational beliefs. Like you think, oh, I'll be okay. I promise I deliver tomorrow. I know there's my son's birthday in the afternoon, but that's fine. I'll work until 2 a.m. No, you're not gonna meet the deadline. So, but people, overconfidence is gonna be a problem here. You don't assess risk correctly. People draw correct inference from information at the disposal out there. There's this massive evidence that people are unable to do that. Nobody can do Bayesian updating in the lab. There's a law of small numbers. There's a law of large numbers. The failure of the law of large numbers and things like that basically show that people that cannot do correct inference, and that will have importance for how they interpret events that happen in contracting situations. And then the last one is something that economists don't talk so much about, but at the beginning to think about that is, if you have to assess risk correctly and draw correct inference, well, what are you drawing inference from? But you have to have collected the data to draw inference from. That requires some effort to collect data. Read reputable sources, social media, for instance. That's your responsibility, of course, as a citizen as well, but also as a part of an economic entity. All right. Economists also assume that people judge their material welfare in absolute terms, not relative to others. That rules out spite. So spite is when you deliberately seek to hurt someone to reduce their material welfare, or actually I've run some experiments where people do that. Basically, it's called money burning experiment. So this is basically you could basically destroy someone else's endowment in a game. You could pay for that, and people do that. Not everyone, thankfully, but there's a fraction of people who do that. And this will change behavior. So I've shown that comparing in an experiment that involves British subjects recruited in England, Kenya, and Uganda, and you find that in Africa, people are motivated by that. They kind of don't like to be, they fear being attacked this way, being victimized that way. This also rules out rival preferences, which there's a lot of evidence from psychology that people have rival preferences. They judge their achievement in life relative to others, not in absolute terms. There's the experiment, the Harvard experiment, that would you prefer to earn 50,000, sooner or 50,000 a year when everybody else in the class earns 25, or earn 100,000 a year and everybody else earns 200,000, 60%, like 2/3 take the first one. And then it also rules out paternalism. Basically, I have a view about what they should consume, how they should behave, and I'm gonna impose that on them in one way or another. So, and that you can do that through markets, of course. There are assumptions about stable preferences that implies sensitivity, so that's fine. They're going to be, economics can deal with that. Predictable anticipated change in preferences can be accommodated, no problem. And temporal complements can be accommodated, it's fine. So these things can be accommodated in economic models. What cannot be accommodated is people have unstable preferences. They don't even know what they like. And as a result, their preferences are not exogenously determined. And so they can be manipulated. Because we know that preferences are shaped by environment during childhood, and that you have all these effects of nurture and nature on cognitive and non-cognitive skills and the preferences associated with those, thrift and grit and so on. And we know that individual history can, like people who have been involved in civil conflicts, will develop certain types of preferences for in-group versus out-group and so on. But we also know from since Bernie's work on propaganda, I think it's 1928, that people can be convinced to change their preferences through advertising or propaganda. So that is often violated. In fact, as development economists, we often meet entire outfits, whose sole purpose is to change people's preferences. We call those things educational campaign, raising awareness. educating the people and so on. They basically, it's marketing for a certain type of behavior. They're not necessarily selling a commercial product, of course, but they may be peddling a certain change in behavior. And they're not doing this through incentives. So they don't really believe the assumptions themselves. Yeah. Because if you believe the preferences are not exogenously determined, how do you do welfare? I'll leave it at that. I don't have a solution. There's another one which is kind of hidden in the background, because economists do worry about opportunism. But if you look at the models, typically opportunism is a focus on one type of opportunism, which is misreporting of information. So that is being studied very extensively. Signaling, statistical discrimination, stereotypes, hidden types, hidden action, mechanism design, auction design, information processing. So all that is being studied a lot. What basically don't focus much on is willful breach of contract, opportunistic breach of contract. Like you told me you would deliver today and it's not there. I don't care. Everybody knows you didn't deliver. I know, you know, the whole neighborhood knows you didn't deliver. Try me. See if you can get your stuff. The fact that you know that it's not delivered, you can prove it to the rest of the world, doesn't give you your stuff. Enforcement does that. In fact, your stuff, you'll never see your stuff on that day. Maybe you will get compensation later. And then there's also a small literature about that. Abhorrent preference is another word people have used. Repugnant preferences is the one I use here. And so these are situations where, remember, I'm interested in regrettable exchange. And so I have to introduce this category where people voluntarily accept a market transaction that knowingly to themselves or to others will reduce their material welfare or is believed to reduce them. So basically, how do you deal with that? If people will voluntarily do things on the moment that may actually hurt them, and there's a high probability they will regret it later. For that, it's not a problem of information. You can say, oh, well, they don't know they're going to, well, you're going to regret it later. That may not be sufficient, right? How many times, those who have teenage children know that you can tell them, you will regret it tomorrow. It's like, And we do that. Don't need this all the time. Okay. Oh. So then when you worry about these things, then you get into normative issues about various types of contracts or market exchange. Think about, what is regarded as normatively acceptable does vary over time. Because slavery, it's completely out, but indenture contracts were used by a lot of Europeans to come to North America or elsewhere, I think. And these were long-term obligatory labor contracts. Wasn't Benjamin Franklin on an indenture contract, which he escaped, right? He ran away from it, if I remember correctly. Marriage without consent of a bride and groom, sex work, marijuana. So there are many countries, but probably the majority of countries in the world, but this is acceptable. Even in the US, if you think about it, I remember reading an article about 200,000 over a period of 10 years, some years ago, 200,000 child marriages. So basically, marriage between people who are below the legal age for marriage. All these marriages were done with the consent of the parents. It's the parents who consent to this marriage. So it's legal in a lot of places in the US, So just, All right, so I've already discussed the evidence. I'm not going to go back to that. So I'm going to skip quickly those 10 things. So Okay, so I kind of I've shattered all the assumptions, lying in ruins on the table. What are we going to do now? Well, okay, so I want to reconstruct something. And I want to reconstruct it instead of starting from the assumptions and then weakening them. I'm going to restart from the other side. Can we get markets without any of these assumptions? And the answer is yes, we can. And I'll show this in a minute. But before I do that, I just reassert what my concern is that some people are vulnerable to circumstances that facilitate or trigger mistakes. That's what behavioral economics shows, basically. So yeah, it's your duty to protect yourself against these triggers. There's a trigger that's going to make you angry, but you try to avoid the trigger, but it cannot always be done. So regrettable exchange occurs when people constant ex ante, the realized gain in expected utility is lower than the anticipated expected utility. So basically, it's not about, oh, I gambled and I lost. No. It's basically, did you gamble thinking there was a 50-50 chance you would win, and actually there was a 90 chance you would lose, 90% chance you would lose. Okay, that's covered. And I don't make any judgment on who's legally or morally responsible for this, because that will actually is very. I just did a vignette online experiment in 15 countries about that. And you see that, yeah, most people think, okay, if you have agreed to something, then you have to stick to it. But then if you can tinker with some of the context of the decision to make them change their minds. Like, oh yeah, maybe this person was not told the truth, or this person was manipulated in one way or another, groomed, or so that's what I call regrettable exchange. And so what we want is basically limit these occurrences of regrettable exchange. So I don't need to talk with that. The problem with, so if you're a policymaker trying to say, let's say that this becomes the policymaker's objective when developing market institutions. They realize that people are vulnerable to various types of mistakes, and they want to protect them for that. The problem is that not everybody, we know that not everybody is incapable of strategic perspective taking. And not everybody is incapable of correct inference. And so there are some people who can do that. So then basically the policymaker has to address these two critical features. They're going to be a trade-off between minimizing regret and personal freedom. I mean, I remember this example is in the UK. There was a beach where there was a rock, and people would go on the rock and jump into the sea. I saw the picture. It wasn't that high, but of course, you're jumping from a rock into the sea. You can hurt yourself. They banned this, and then it's not a transaction, but nonetheless, they health and safety. So they banned this, arguing that yes, the people who were jumping was capable of doing it. They were strong, blah blah blah. They were alert and so on. But others might follow their example and not be so smart. So I think they do the same thing in Germany. If you jaywalk, they will say, "Oh well, no, you cannot jaywalk because maybe you know there is no car coming, but maybe someone else is going to jaywalk without looking. It's going to be your fault." So different societies at different times make different choices about freedom. And jaywalking, is it part of your personal freedom, or are you putting other people at risk? So these are difficult trade-offs, but there are trade-offs that have to do with pretty much everything I've discussed so far. And of course, regret implies miscalculation. And so sometimes the miscalculation is will be regarded as your fault. It's like, how could you have been so stupid to buy bleach? And some of the times they will think, well, maybe not. You took the advice of a prominent political member of society, and maybe you have some excuses. President of Madagascar. So you can model that. You can say, okay, there are some people who are regret prone. They will make mistakes. People who are regret free, they know what they're doing. These are fractions of these different people. Then the utilitarian expected social value would be of unrestricted freedom would be this. You're losing those people who make mistakes. So then if you want to decide whether or not you're going to ban a particular type of transaction, you can look at the situation whether this is true, or maybe you're going to weigh, which is what policymakers often do, you weigh social welfare by how deserving the vulnerable group is. If they are children, or if they are women, some context. So remember paternalistic discrimination work? It's basically that kind of stuff. And so then you can say, oh, wait a minute, if we could just identify these people, can target them, and so on. So definitely you look at that. So that's one world of policy making that opens to you. You can also see whether you can use these behaviors with warnings. That's the nudge approach. If you even with warnings, that will only work with sophisticates, right? Not teenagers. Oh no, I can jump from that point. Yeah, okay. So sophisticates will be. So anyway, so there's some room there for work. I'd like to do something different for the little bit of time I have left. And that something different, the seed for that something different was put in my head by this old book by Nelson and Winter. And what these two authors did in 1982, it was basically about evolutionary game theory. And they took very simple assumptions about behavior. They were not optimizing at all. And then they put this in a model, let the model run, and then generate predictions, aggregate predictions that often matched standard economic predictions. And the whole book's about that. So I thought, well, actually, from that reasoning, you can get certain outcomes, which economists would look at and say, yeah, it's exactly what the theory predicts, but it doesn't come from the theory. It comes from different rules of behavior. So that's what I thought, okay, fine. So what if I apply this to markets? And so I started by saying, what would be the minimal set of behavioral assumptions to get market exchange to exist? I'm not saying to be efficient. It will not be efficient, but to exist. So we will observe market and we say, see, this market proves that people are maximizing their utility and so on. And there are going to be lots of, I discussed that. And so what I do is I found this in a behavioral paper where they introduced this distinction between homogeneous, differentiated experience and credence goods. Homogeneous goods are the stuff that you know immediately what it is. You go to the market, you see a cauliflower, it's a cauliflower. You don't have to, or you can go to the market, pick a cauliflower, pay in cash, go home. Differentiated good is well, you need a dress or a new pair of jeans to go to your tribute conference, and it has to be your size and so on and so forth. So they basically then it becomes a search problem. So you have to search for the right stuff that you want. So that's a differentiated good. An experience good is something. J. Bai has a nice paper about melons, very beautiful paper on melons about that. Basically, a good that you cannot tell when you buy it whether it's going to be good. You go to Safeway, buy peaches, and half the time you have to throw them away, actually, which is very frustrating. Either they are not ripe or they've been put in the fridge or something like that. So this is so that's an experience good. So basically, you don't know when you buy, but after you bought it, you know that it's bad. And then there are credence goods. Credence goods are the stuff where you never know. As an individual, you never know what you got. And there's actually a lot of examples of this. Yeah, I'll come back to this. All right. And so what kind of problems do we encounter in these four? These are archetypes, okay? They are archetypes. But let's start with homogeneous good. I'll say rice, meat, cowpeas, ghee. The minimal contract, well, it's a very simple contract. I've already told you, it's cash and carry. And if you go to a lot of street markets across the world, the market is a cash and carry market. And that's, you know, economists would not predict that. It's just like, oh, what's the problem? There's a court to enforce the contract. Why don't you take delivery tomorrow? Why don't you pay tomorrow? Not the way most street markets operate. They cash and carry. And it's immediate delivery. And that's because you can inspect the good on the spot, so you know what you're buying. That can be completely anonymous. There's no quality premium, no need for branding or reputation. Simple search, since you immediately recognize the cauliflower when you see it. So that makes it, what makes it easier for you to find the cauliflowers if all the cauliflowers are in the part of the market where, you know, vegetables are sold. So, you know, basically sellers of cauliflowers and other vegetables will congregate together to facilitate search. There's no differentiation, there's no reputation. Starting a business, you just need the money and the time, that's all. There's also race to the bottom because there's no premium for quality. All these goods are undifferentiated. So everybody, you know, whether the rice is good or bad, you cannot tell. And in the absence of returns to scale, it doesn't really, because there's no reputation and nothing. Basically, typically, you don't have any increasing returns to scale, and firms remain small. And I have an old paper where I document that in agricultural trade. So what do you need? People respond to material incentives. Well, it's not required because people overpay. That's their problem. The seller underpays, as it happens a lot, because a lot of these retail traders who enter the market end up exiting very quickly. They lose all their working capital because they don't know how to operate a business. So that's not required. In fact, that people recognize what's in their material interest. It's not required. People are strategic, not required. They can behave like an automaton. Do they need to be consequentialist? No, they may care about the process. Oh, this person smiled to me, therefore I buy from her. So that's okay. It doesn't matter. They can have emotions. They can get angry. All that one. Again, they can be discriminatory. They can have for tasteful discrimination. They don't have to form rational judgment. There's very little role for beliefs in this, and they don't need to judge their material welfare in absolute terms. They can be buying something to take it away from you. I once read a paper. I was in line for French baguette at my Sainsbury in the UK, and then there were people in front of me. There would be 3 baguettes left, and I'm thinking, oh, I have the next one. I get baguette. They would take all the 3 baguettes away. It's like, you cannot eat all those 3 baguettes today. They're not going to be fresh tomorrow. And so why? I'm first in line. So there you go. Like, why? If you were at a cocktail party, you wouldn't go and say, oh, all the sandwiches, I'm going to grab all those sandwiches and go. But what are you doing? It's the market. So that's a little bit, you know, you always suspect, are they doing this spite me? Never know. What you need is money and other medium of exchange. So, you know, people have invented all kinds of money over the years. And respect for property rights. When I say property rights, actually it's more respect for possession, because people don't know whether they are the owner of these things. There's lots of stolen goods that are sold on you know, street markets, and you don't know. I remember buying a new cap for my car in Ethiopia from the part of the market that was selling stolen goods. So I bought another cap stolen from another car. Oh, you know. That one has a key. They made a key for me right there on the spot. So there are problems. How do you estimate quantity? That's where weights and measures come into the picture. Price inequality, well, may have rules about price posting, rules about discounts or sales that trick buyers. You can also have institutions that help homogenization to facilitate trade. So then you need standardized names, but these are grades, so like grades for wheat, for instance. Standard names for quality levels, list of ingredients on packaging, standard names for ingredients. The European Union has standard names for all kinds of chemicals. And then, of course, there's room for fraud. Remember the example of turmeric and lead treatment. So even in that simple market, you can see there are things that can be done to improve the efficiency of the market, to reduce regrettable exchange. So what about differentiated goods? What's the minimal contract there? Well, buyers put different values on different goods. So it's more complicated, raises the cost of search. So there, cash and carry can still be the minimal contract. You just look and look and look until you find the pair of jeans you like. But to economize on search costs, long-term loyalty becomes interesting. If you have a specific supplier of these melons that you like, you say, oh I'm going to go back to that melon seller, or I'm going to go back to Heinz beans because I know exactly what they taste like 50 years later, and you can go to a specific retail point that offers like a let's see, urban market or commercial retail point. So you can see that what we observe is often kind of not very far from these very simple predictions that you get. Breach of contract can be punished if there is loyalty that develops. So then that introduces a new penalty, which can have a deterrent effect. So basically, if you're loyal to a certain brand, and suddenly this like Toyota is a good car, suddenly they sell you cars with bad tires, you think, maybe I'm going to lose my loyalty for this brand. So you punish the brand by taking your business elsewhere. So that will serve as incentive. But it will cost to switch as well. So anyway, so there's a whole bunch of things you can do with this simple setup. But again, don't require that people react to incentives. Many things are not required. People can make mistakes, will make mistakes. Emotions will get in the way. They will not draw correct inference. They have unstable preferences. But what is useful or required? You need to be able to identify the differentiated good. So sometimes it's okay, but sometimes you need rules about tagging. So like, is it a size 9 or is it a size 10? You won't be able to tell just by, and you have to try it and so on. Okay, fine. So that maybe increases the search cost, obviously. So what solutions what institutions can help can improve the efficiency of cash and carry trade? Well, you can facilitate search. This is a big one. You can protect identification. That's a very large. It's about ID cards. It's about business registry. About all kinds of other registries. About trademarks, brand protection. Right? It's a very big box. Lots of things in it. And think about you go to a street market. There's no brand. There's no brand at all. It's just basically, and this one day Pascaline is sitting there, and the next day Abi is sitting there. It don't even have a fixed place of sale. No, some wholesalers do, but a lot of them just sit there. So identification is completely missing. There's no name, no brand, no fixed location, no Facebook address, of course. And so institutions are going to develop to create this identification, to allow identification that you can have recognition or you can develop loyalty or a brand, a name, a trademark, whatever. Shop, business, commercial more, style of packaging. And without these protections, product differentiation is difficult. And that's when you get, so if you have a good that could be differentiated, there could be different types of rice. It could be basmati rice and another type of rice. I know basmati is looks a little different, so maybe you can tell. But let's say different types of basmati rice. Well, I mean, how are you going to tell if there is not a brand or some trace, maybe? All right. Experience goods. There, the thing is that since you need to experience the good first, then the minimal contract typically is relationship-based. Basically, you know, you try a worker, not so good. Try another worker, find somebody who can do the job. Fantastic, keep this person. Basically, you don't say, "Oh, I'm gonna look again tomorrow for another worker." No, you just stick to that. So that's basically you get this relationship-based type of setup. And there's a punishment that comes very naturally to this setting. It doesn't require a lot of assumptions. People will, you know, they get angry because suddenly the good doesn't satisfy what they were expecting. They may move, you know, just leave the supplier. So that's what happens in experience goods. All right, so here some strategic understanding is required. People have to realize that underperforming, so you know, tricking you in with a good melon today and then selling you a crap melon tomorrow is going to backfire, because then you know tomorrow after tomorrow you're not going to come back again. But the other assumptions are not really required. You can live without that. You can have market exchange without that. Rational beliefs are not strictly required, but they must believe that misbehavior may end the relationship. Otherwise, there's no relationship. The relationships are very flimsy. They just basically disappear immediately because people, it's a hit and run. They basically say, "Oh, I can do a good job today, so I can treat you better tomorrow." If everybody does that, and this market is going to be very thin. All right, so I discussed this. Let me go to the last one, which is freelance good. That's an interesting one. So there are many services that fit this definition: medical goods and services, many types of advice and consulting, a lot of labor actually. Cannot the employer may never know exactly what you are doing. So in this case, the minimal contract is a completely different contract. It's trust-based. I didn't say rational trust-based. I say trust-based. So snake oil is a market for something you can never know whether actually it hits something any good. We know now, of course, it's just petroleum. It didn't do anything good. And but as long as you trust the person who told you a beautiful story, you want to hear the motivated reasonings. Oh, I really want to believe that this thing is going to go coughing every morning. It would be nice to have something I can drink to deal with that. Or my son is poorly. If somebody tells me there's something I can do to protect my son. So now, because it's never verifiable, so once it's established, it can be persistent. And you can refer other friends, you can spread. So, and punishment is going to be very problematic since you can never check what you got. And so in this model, it's trust-based. So where is trust coming from? It could be coming from propaganda, basically from advertising. It could also be coming from signals of trustworthiness. And so you see these attributes that you have seen in many markets. Or I wear a cross, or I wear a little hat to show that I'm a religious person. I can be trusted. And there's actually interesting work on that. Gina and Smiga had some fascinating work on that. Do these markets exist? Well, here's a picture from, there are about 1 million such type depictions in old Egyptian temples. And what happens is that this person is offering something to a goddess. I think it's Isis. Of course, Isis is a god, so they have to offer this stuff actually to the priests. And so the priests are offering this service. We intercede on your behalf to goddess Isis to help your coughing in the morning. Just make us some gift. We'll talk to her. This is what is 3,500 years ago. It's a market. They're buying cures. Market exists, and propaganda exists. The walls of the temples are covered with people making offerings, and different types of offerings. If we take anything, that brings something. So relational. So in this case, what happens is that the problem is that trust becomes a problem. I mean, blind trust like this, it's actually a problem for efficiency, which is the opposite of what a lot of the theory on generalized trust says. Development of the market institution is going from trusting your brother or your nephew to trusting strangers. It's like, well, you're trusting strangers selling snake oil, maybe you shouldn't. Okay, so that's pretty much where I wanted to go. So again, this is where you get a lot of market support. It's really important. Things like credentials, certification, audits, all those things. You need someone to come. You need somebody to put all this information together to work out. For instance, that was a case in France about something they were putting for people with a heart problem, and there were two models. One had a 50% death rate within 3 years. The other one had a 15% death rate within 3 years. And guess what? They were selling both of them. All right, because some doctors were quite happy to sell one of them because they were getting maybe kickbacks or whatever. But even without that, maybe they were convinced it's a good product. So there we are. So that can revisit what I told you before. Now you can see they provide some solution to certain kinds of problems I've just discussed. I'm not going to go back. It's the same slides, but the point is that they basically all these institutions fit within a system where the markets exist, but they're inefficient because people make mistakes. So there's a regrettable exchange. So that's what I have time for. Market exchange is possible even when economic agents do not follow most or even all the assumptions made in economics. These minimal contracts are usually inefficient, and blind trust is actually very dangerous. So that's another way of looking, proposing another way of looking at market institution. Sense of it.
All right, well, I think I'm Kate Casey. I'm in charge of facilitating the online tributes, but I think there's so many people also in the room. I think we can have some spontaneous short, like not more than 2 minutes. So I'll start talking for like a minute and just start thinking about what you might want to say for a great colleague, Marcel. And if you're online, tell Wendy you want to say something. I will put you up. So Marcel, I feel like the richness of our community depends on what people put into it, and you're just an extraordinary contributor to our community. I really appreciate it. When I first came here, you and Abby invited me over to your beautiful home, my family, and it made us feel very welcome. I see you in seminar. I see you with our graduate students. I have come to you for advice, and one thing I love about you is no idea is too out there. You never say, is that really economics? Like you never say that. Table, you're just, whatever the idea is, you're right there with someone and just like, okay, let's talk. Like, which direction do we go? Which of this? It's never that you're, on the wrong track. It's like, how do you get the most out of this idea and let's work together? And I really, really appreciate that about you. Who would like to say any just short words? Yes.
So it's, I'm Scott Roselle. Marcel came to Stanford 6 months before I came. We were in the Food Research Institute.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right over there. You know, the first time Condi did something wrong was shut I'm not gonna go no further than that. Exactly. But you know, I came as a very empirical economist. I mean, I'm still taking notes today, you know, from Marcel. And Marcel had this theory and down deep, and we sort of, you know, went back and forth. And it's so he came to Stanford before I did, and then we both got shoved over to the economics department, and we were told right away, you aren't going to stay here very long. So I went to Davis first before he went to Oxford, but I came back to Stanford before he came back, and now he's leaving before me. We've been to, and our bosses are really good friends, and we're gonna. You aren't leaving, so it's
So 6 months.
exactly. So, he's really made contributions to the field, and continuing to do so. So it's great. Good.
Great. Yeah. Well, yeah, please, Ryan.
Yeah, Marcel, we're very sad to lose you. You know, the experimental behavior community at Stanford is very small, and a quarter is standing here in front of you. It was, every time, every seminar he came, he was present. He's talking to our students, he's talking to us, and you know, we're going to lose a quarter of our faculty, so it'll be very sad. But you know, I'm looking forward to hearing more from you. Yeah.
I must add that I really benefited a lot from being part of the group. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Elwin. I'm a former student of Marcel from Oxford. So, yeah, I think kind of three things I want to say to you. Kind of, I'm really kind of admire kind of the way you think about things. You're a very kind of intuitive thinker, and it's really kind of always kind of stuck with me. Kind of not kind of looking at the standard models, but kind of thinking about kind of what can you say, kind of what is different. Thinking about heuristics, thinking of how people see situations, and yeah, kind of not taking things for granted. I think the second thing I really admire you is like your career has gone through several evolutions in a way. Kind of you looked at the topic and you've transformed it. And I was very grateful to be kind of part of one of your later evolutions around kind of behavioral economics and looking into that. And finally, also mentorship. And I mean, you got me into development economics, and I'm still very much kind of grateful for that. So thanks a lot, Marcel.
Thanks a lot. It was nice working with you, by the way.
I'm Alberto. I'm a colleague of Marcel in DRL, and the thing I want to share with the room, mostly because I think the minority here knows that Marcel is always on Thursday in this seminar, which is the most sort of really like diverse seminar, and he's always there. He always asks the question. And the question, you know, sometimes it's really out there in terms of the either his expertise or the speaker or whatever it is. But it's always like this Marcel question comes in. I don't think I have ever seen him miss that Thursday seminar. So thank you for always being there.
Since 1990.
I remember one that talking about out there. I remember there was this paper about Cameroon elections. Supposed BI just again won. It was 94 or something. And at that time, this presenter had gone around the country, Cameroon, after an election like this. But it was not. It was much tighter. It was 45 versus. If you remember, Catherine. And so this researcher talked to people who had voted for BIA, and they were very happy with democracy. And then I told people who voted for the opposition, they had been voting for the opposition for the last decade, you know, basically, the guy was in power for 34 years. They were not very happy with democracy. So I then say, why is that? You know, well, I mean, So I said, well, we could have another system whereby if you get 55% of the votes, you get to be in power for 55% of the time. And then the others, maybe they would be happier with that. That's really far up.
Say just a few words. I'm Alessandra Buena. I'm in the economics department, and well, I'm really impressed about hearing to how many communities you've been contributing, because you've also been so central. Well, I'm sure people will talk about development, but I wanted to mention also the gender group. And I refuse to accept the notion that you won't be there on Fridays. hopefully we'll keep seeing you. But thank you so much for always providing your perspectives to students. Make sure they stay rigorous, and it's been really so meaningful and important to have you there. And yeah, we hope to keep seeing you sometimes.
I enjoy interacting with that group.
I used to be here 2 years ago. And I will speak later, so I won't say much now. But just wanted to react to the out there comments. I used to tell myself and my colleagues and the students, okay, maybe you didn't understand what Marcel meant. Maybe it sounded crazy, but did you write it down? Maybe in a week's time, it's gonna start making sense. Maybe in 2 weeks' time, and for sure in 6 months.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Hisham. I'm Marcel's colleague at CDDRL, and I'm actually gonna rip off Alberto's story, and I'm gonna say just a short story. I don't think Marcel is aware of this, but we started around the same time. We're practically the same age, right? It's 2013. What I'm gonna mention is that in one of those Thursday seminars, we did have a visiting scholar at CDDRL who, and that was one of those days when we had a very ethnographic talk that was going to talk about intersubjectivities, et cetera, et cetera. So something that we did not necessarily associate with the mainstream of economics. And that economist actually told me there's a world-renowned economist here at Stanford that I really want to meet. And I was like, who is it? And he said, Marcel Fafchamps. And then I was like, oh, he's right there. It's like, he's there. And I said, yes. And he's like, he comes and sits with you at the seminar. And yes, he's actually here every week. And that is to say, I think everybody, and what I'm trying to get at is that this just speaks to Marcel's openness, his generosity as a colleague, and also everything about this day actually speaks to Marcel's generosity and kindness. The day is not about himself and his contributions, but he's making this day about his students, his colleagues, the lines of inquiry that he started and that he wishes other people to take on and for the field to take on and advance forward, hence unfinished business. So thank you, Marcel. It's an honor to be your colleague.
But I mean, I come to these seminars because I enjoy them. I get something out of it. I mean,
I enjoy it.
Before I came to CDRL, I took democracy for granted. I thought I understood what it was. And then with all these papers and these presentations, I realized, wait a minute, this is a much more complicated object. And yeah, so yeah, I'm interested. That's a problem.
I enjoy watching your facial expressions during some of the papers, which sometimes are a little up there. I agree, but yeah, what a wonderful.
Oh, we have one online. Okay, can you or actually, why don't we take one while we're getting our online colleagues up? Yeah, please.
My name is Yasuyuki Yasawada from University of Tokyo, Japan. I flew from Tokyo last night. And I did PhD in 1999 here at Stanford, and probably one of the last student of myself before he moved into World Bank and Oxford. And so actually, together with Scott and Marcel and the other fellow student, we fought against the closure of Purdue Research Institute. But anyway, I ended up getting PhD from Econ department. And since then, I joined UTokyo the last 26 years. I'm really working on the micro development in line with myself, market and government failure and social capital. And one thing, I had a chance to visit Oxford 2011, 14 or so years ago with my little daughter. She was 6 years old, and she started, Marcel and Avi kindly invited us to home, and my daughter started playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And they immediately after Marcel started jamming. So I was music. And actually, my daughter now junior student at Stanford, working on game theory in economics, and Michi Kandori and Fukito Kojima. So probably Marcel is not aware. He has a lot of granddaughters, grandsons, and some of them are partly biological. So not a so, but anyway, really congratulate on your retirement. Today's lecture for me, it sounds like consolidation of your past work, but at the same time, it's kind of an initiation of a new stream of research. So I'm really looking forward to know more about your future research. Thank you. Thank you very much, and congratulations again. And my fellow colleague, Albert Park, ADB chief economist, and I was also ADB chief economist. He asked me to convey his greetings, and Tak Kurosaki and Nani Jimenez for ADB, all of them asked me to convey greetings to you. Congratulations again.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, we have a colleague online. Paulo.
Oh, wow.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Marcel. Congratulations on yet another achievement. I feel this is a very special day, and I'm very sad that I'm missing it in person, but I am very glad that technology allows me to be there, at least like this. I've just been able to join, but I thought I should add my congrats to you, and maybe bring a little bit of ancient history into the picture. I mean, Marcel and I met now a few years ago, and while he was still on the other side of the Atlantic, and it's been a wonderful journey. Marcel has been a wonderful mentor and colleague, needless to say. And you know what? Speaking of unfinished business, Marcel may be retiring, but I still owe you a paper, Marcel, and I'm well aware of that. And, we will continue working. In fact, we have a meeting next week, so it's very much. So, sorry, I think that was Pascaline. Do I owe you something as well, Pascaline? Sorry, can't hear that, but and it's true. A big hug to all of you, and a big hug to Marcel. Congratulations, and I'm sure we'll be in touch soon. And but enjoy the day, and see you soon. All the best.
Excellent.
Well, why don't we just move our tributes into the coffee area, and we can deliver them one-on-one. But thank you, Marcel, for that lecture.